You rarely notice the weight of the moment you're in. It feels ordinary, almost forgettable. But life has a way of turning the quietest choices into the loudest echoes. A word you spoke, a chance you didn't take, a door you closed without thinking. These are the things that bend the shape of your future. Small doesn't mean insignificant. It only means hidden until time reveals what it was always becoming. It's easy to believe your life is already written, that what happens to you is fate. But if you look closer, you'll see a trail of choices, some made with certainty, others made in silence, that led you here. Destiny isn't a map. It's a story you keep writing every day. The question is not what's meant to happen. The real question is, what choices am I making when no one is watching? Every choice is like a pebble tossed into still water. The moment feels small, but the ripples stretch farther than you can see. Say yes when you're afraid, and suddenly new doors open. Stay silent when you long to speak, and that silence grows into distance. The ripple doesn't ask for your permission. It moves because you moved. What you decide today shapes who you become tomorrow and who others become around you. Not choosing doesn't protect you. It still takes you somewhere. Avoiding the hard conversation, staying in the job that drains you, keeping quiet when your heart is loud. These are decisions too. Indecision often feels safer, but it quietly builds a life you never intended to live. By refusing to choose, you've chosen to stay where you are. And that choice, repeated long enough, becomes the story you tell about yourself. Inside your mind, there is always a debate. One part of you reaches for safety, while another part longs for change. This is not weakness, it's biology. Your brain is wired to protect you from risk, even when the risk is what you need to grow. Fear and hope both want the final word, but you are not a prisoner to either. When you notice the tug of war, you gain the power to step in and decide. So often, the biggest turning points don't feel dramatic. They arrive quietly, an invitation you ignore, a chance you say yes to without knowing why, a goodbye you didn't realize was final. Only later do you see it for what it was, a crossroads disguised as an ordinary day. You've stood at many of these without noticing. And maybe right now you're standing at another one. Pause for a moment, breathe. Ask yourself, what decision is waiting for me right now? It doesn't need to be grand, it just needs to be honest. Life shifts when you stop moving on autopilot and notice the choice in front of you. You are not powerless. You are not bound to repeat what has always been. One decision can rewrite the direction of your life if you are willing to see it. Your brain's first promise to you was never to make you happy. It was to keep you alive. Long before you learned what love feels like or what dreams you could chase, your nervous system was already hardwired to scan for danger. That's why, when faced with a choice, your body sometimes reacts before your mind even understands what's happening. Heart racing, muscles tightening, thoughts spinning. That is fight, flight, or freeze stepping in. Ancient patterns whispering, stay safe, even if it means staying small. But here's the quiet truth. Safety and growth often live on opposite sides of the same door. The instinct that protects you is the same one that convinces you not to try, not to risk, not to step into the unknown. Recognizing this isn't about blaming yourself. It's about understanding the wiring you inherited. When you catch yourself shrinking back, remind yourself, this isn't weakness, it's survival. And survival doesn't have to be the ceiling of your life. Awareness is the first crack of light that shows you there's more beyond the reflex. Why do you hesitate when the opportunity is right in front of you? It isn't always doubt in your ability. Often it's the shadow of regret you haven't even felt yet. The thought of making the wrong choice becomes heavier than the possibility of moving forward at all. You rehearse every outcome in your mind, but none of them feel safe enough. And so you stay still, not because you don't care, but because you care too much about a future disappointment that hasn't even arrived. This fear is subtle, but it rules more lives than people realize. You tell yourself you're being careful when in truth you're being held hostage by what if. The tragedy is that in trying to avoid regret, you end up living with a quieter, longer-lasting one. The regret of never knowing what could have been. It's not recklessness that frees you. It's the gentle acceptance that regret is a companion of life either way, and what matters is choosing the kind of regret you can live with. Think of the times you went back to something you knew would hurt you, the relationship that drained you, the job that left you empty, the cycle you swore you'd break. You didn't return because you loved the pain. You returned because it was familiar. The nervous system, shaped by years of repetition, often mistakes what is known for what is safe. So even when the familiar is toxic, it feels like home to your body. This is why people repeat patterns they consciously want to escape. The comfort isn't in the joy, it's in the predictability. The brain whispers, at least you know this. But comfort built on pain is a cage, not a shelter. To break free, you have to be willing to feel the unease of unfamiliar kindness, the awkwardness of peace, the strangeness of healthy love. Your nervous system will resist, but with time it will learn, safety can feel different. Inside your mind, every decision becomes a trial. Fear stands as the prosecutor, listing all the risks, painting pictures of failure, humiliation, loss. Hope sits across as the defense, trying to remind you of possibility, of growth, of what could be waiting if you stepped forward. And you are the judge, listening to both voices, unsure which one to believe. The trial rarely ends quickly. Fear brings evidence from your past, highlighting every wound, every disappointment. Hope quietly argues with visions of healing and joy. Sometimes fear wins, not because it's right, but because it shouts louder. But the trial is not rigged. You can pause, listen deeper, and ask yourself, is this fear protecting me from danger, or just from discomfort? In that question, you shift from being a passive judge to an active one. The verdict doesn't always have to be safety. Sometimes it can be trust. Many of the choices you make today are not born in the present moment. They are echoes of decisions you made long ago, often as a child, when survival meant adapting to the environment around you. If love was inconsistent, you might have decided without words that you had to earn it by pleasing others. If your feelings were dismissed, you may have learned to silence them, deciding it was safer not to need too much. These weren't mistakes, they were strategies to survive. But here you are, still living out those strategies in adult life. You keep choosing silence when your truth needs to be spoken. You keep bending yourself for love that never bends for you. These aren't conscious choices now, they are echoes. The healing begins when you hear those echoes and realize the child who made those decisions was protecting you, but you are not that child anymore. You get to choose differently now. You might have noticed that your life feels like it keeps circling the same themes. Maybe you find yourself drawn to the same kind of partner, the same arguments, the same cycles that end with the same kind of pain. It's not because you're broken, and it's not because you're incapable of change. It's because the unconscious mind is stubbornly repetitive. It seeks resolution by replaying the same script, hoping for a different ending. Imagine someone who keeps falling into toxic relationships. They don't walk into them wanting to be hurt, but their nervous system recognizes the chaos as normal, and without realizing it, they mistake the familiar storm for connection. The way forward is not to judge yourself for the repetition, but to notice it. To say, I see the loop. That awareness interrupts the unconscious drive. Naming the pattern is the first step in loosening its grip. Here's where the shift happens. You don't need to dismantle your entire psychology overnight. What you need is a pause. A single breath between the old impulse and the action that usually follows. The pause is not weakness, it's power. In that gap you can ask, am I choosing comfort or growth? That single question is enough to interrupt years of programming. Start small. Next time you feel pulled into a familiar loop, take a grounding breath. Notice 5 things you can see, 4 you can touch, 3 you can hear, 2 you can smell, 1 you can taste. Anchor yourself in the present instead of being dragged into the past. Then journal. What decision did I almost make on autopilot today? What was I really afraid of? This practice isn't about perfection, it's about awareness. Every pause is a vote for a new story. Every breath is proof that the cycle doesn't own you. With time, the unconscious choices lose their grip, and conscious living takes their place. You've convinced yourself that staying where you are is safer than moving forward. The job you hate, the relationship that drains you, the silence you keep, they all feel familiar, and familiarity can trick you into believing it's safety. But safety without growth is just another word for stagnation. You tell yourself, at least I know what to expect here, as if certainty is worth more than fulfillment. The paradox is that what you think is protecting you is also suffocating you. Fear whispers that change will be harder, scarier, more painful. Yet regret is a pain that doesn't shout. It lingers quietly, every day reminding you of what you didn't do. Safety becomes the prison you've built with your own hands, and you don't even notice the lock is on the inside. Fear has its purpose. It stops you from walking into traffic, from touching fire, from ignoring danger. In that sense, it's your oldest protector. But fear doesn't know the difference between survival and growth. It treats every new opportunity as if it were life-threatening. A job change, a relationship risk, even speaking your truth. Fear responds with the same alarms. You feel it in your chest, that tightening, the urge to pull back. That's fear trying to protect you, but protection can become imprisonment. The truth is, fear doesn't care about your happiness. It only cares about keeping you alive. That's why so many people live half-lives, alive but not truly living. Fear holds the keys, but it's you who decides whether to keep obeying it. Think about the times you waited, waiting for the right moment to speak, to move, to leave, to try. At first, waiting feels like safety. You tell yourself, I'll know when it's time. But days turn to months, months into years. Waiting begins to feel less like patience, and more like quicksand, slowly pulling you down while life continues around you. One day you wake up realizing the decision was made for you, not by you, but by your silence. The price of inaction isn't just lost time. It's the weight of regret pressing heavier with every passing season. Fear makes you delay, but delay becomes its own form of loss. And the longer you wait, the deeper the sink, the harder it feels to climb back out. What terrifies you more, failing or never knowing? Most people will say failing, but deep down, it's the not knowing that haunts us longer. Failure stings, yes, but the absence of trying creates a silence that grows louder with time.
It's in the thoughts that creep in late at night. What if I had said yes? What if I had tried? What if I had left sooner? Those aren't passing thoughts. They're echoes of choices abandoned. The weight of what could have been sits heavier than the weight of failure, because at least failure has a lesson, a story, a scar to show. Regret is emptiness. It leaves nothing but blank pages where chapters should have been written, and that blankness becomes its own kind of burden. Fear doesn't have to be the signal to stop. What if it was a signal to start? That trembling in your chest, that anxious voice in your mind, they don't always mean danger. Sometimes they mean you're stepping into a life that matters. Fear can't be eliminated, but it can be reframed. Instead of asking, how do I get rid of fear? Ask, what is fear showing me I care about? Fear only rises when something matters deeply. It's proof you're standing at the edge of something worth exploring. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving with it, holding its hand, and stepping forward anyway. Every meaningful decision in your life will carry fear, and that's exactly why it's meaningful. I once knew someone who stayed in the same routine for over a decade. Every year they said, next year I'll change. But they never did. They weren't lazy. They were afraid of losing the little they had, afraid of failing, afraid of judgment. They believed that by avoiding the risk, they were avoiding pain. But years later, they admitted something heavier. It wasn't the risk that hurt them, it was the regret. They realized the life they wanted had slipped through their fingers, not because they couldn't reach it, but because they never tried. That's the fantasy of regret. You think avoiding loss will protect you, but it quietly steals from you anyway. The loss of possibility is a loss all its own. Close your eyes and imagine yourself 10 years from now. Nothing has changed. You're still in the same place, the same routines, the same fears keeping you quiet. How does it feel to picture yourself living the same day over and over? Now imagine another version of you. The one who took a risk, who dared to step forward even while trembling. That version may have scars, may have stories of mistakes, but they also have a life that feels alive. This isn't about perfection, it's about direction. 10 years will pass either way. Which version of yourself do you want to meet? The one who stayed safe in silence, or the one who discovered what was waiting beyond it? Healing doesn't start with a grand leap. It begins with the smallest step you're brave enough to take today. You don't have to change your whole life overnight. You only have to move 1 inch forward. Say the word you've been holding back. Write the first sentence of the story you've been avoiding. Take the first step out of the door you've been afraid to walk through. Action heals because it breaks the illusion that you are powerless. Every step proves to your nervous system, your mind and your heart, that you are capable of more than fear suggests. Ask yourself tonight, if I wasn't afraid of losing, what would I try? Let your answer guide one small steady step. That's where freedom begins. We tell ourselves that staying where we are is safer. That if we just keep things the same, at least we won't break what's already fragile. But deep down you know the truth. Safety in the familiar is often just another kind of suffering. You keep replaying the same routines, the same arguments, the same loneliness, because stepping into the unknown feels unbearable. The mind whispers, at least here I know the pain I'm dealing with. But that false safety costs you something precious, possibility. The unknown may carry risk, but clinging to what hurts you only ensures that regret grows louder with time. Fear is not the enemy. It's your mind's way of trying to protect you, like an overprotective guard dog that barks at every shadow. It shields you from danger, or at least what it thinks is danger. But what begins as protection becomes a cage. You stop exploring. You stop reaching. You stop trusting yourself with the possibility of more. Fear says, stay here. At least you won't get hurt. But what it doesn't tell you is that staying here hurts in its own way. The same walls that keep pain out also keep you locked inside. And you deserve more than just surviving. Ask yourself honestly, what terrifies you more? Failing or never trying? Imagine years passing, and that quiet ache still sitting inside you, whispering about the dream you never touched, the relationship you never dared to pursue, the truth you never spoke out loud. Failure stings, yes, but what if lingers? It doesn't leave. It grows heavier every time you replay the choice you didn't make. You can heal from mistakes. You can learn from falling. But the ache of never knowing? That becomes a ghost you carry into every room, every silence, every moment where your heart wonders what could have been. So many people wait for the moment when everything lines up perfectly, when they feel brave enough, ready enough, certain enough. But life rarely gives you that kind of guarantee. Instead, days stretch into months, and months into years. The waiting starts to feel like safety, but really, it's another form of loss. Because while you wait for the perfect time, time itself keeps moving. You tell yourself, maybe later. But later never comes in the way you expect. And one day, you'll look back and realize that waiting didn't protect you. It only stole the years you thought you had. I once heard about someone who dreamed of writing, but kept putting it off, too afraid their words wouldn't be good enough. Decades passed, the dream never left, but the courage never came. And by the time they finally looked back, what hurt wasn't that they never became famous, or even published. What hurt was knowing they never gave themselves a chance. Regret outweighed every fear they once had. The truth is, risk fades, fear fades. But regret hardens with age, becoming heavier to carry. The question is never whether risk is scary. The real question is, can you live with never knowing? Close your eyes for a moment. Picture yourself 10 years from now, if nothing changes. The same routines, the same worries, the same ache of maybe tomorrow. Feel the weight of that future. Now imagine the other version of you, the one who tried, who stumbled maybe, but kept moving, who let fear ride in the passenger seat, but refused to hand it the wheel. Which version of you feels more alive? Which one feels more like who you were meant to be? That image is not fantasy. It's a choice you're standing in front of right now. You don't have to leap into a new life overnight. Fear makes it feel like change has to be massive or not at all. But the truth is, transformation begins with the smallest step. A conversation you've been avoiding. A single page written. One brave choice, however quiet. Try this. Write down the question. If I wasn't afraid of losing, what would I try? Let your answer surprise you. That one sentence can point you toward the first step you've been waiting for. And once you take it, even if fear follows, regret starts to lose its grip. Because courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about moving anyway. Most of the turning points in your life don't arrive with flashing signs or clear warnings. They slip in quietly, disguised as small delays, unspoken hesitations, or the familiar choice to do nothing for now. But not choosing is also a decision, one that silently shapes your path. Every time you put off a conversation, avoid a risk, or repeat an old pattern because it feels safer, you are deciding the direction of your life. And often, years later, people look back and realize that the moments that defined them were the ones they didn't even notice they were choosing. The invisible fork in the road. Imagine yourself walking, unaware that you've reached an unseen fork in the road. One path is smooth, familiar, and promises a sense of safety. The other looks uncertain, uneven, and demands something of you. Courage, trust, or risk. Both paths will cost you something. The safe one may cost you growth. The uncertain one may cost you comfort. This is the quiet truth about decision points. Even standing still is a direction. Life asks you to move, even when you pretend you're not moving at all. Who you've been versus who you're becoming. Every decision is a mirror. One reflection shows you who you've been, the patterns, the habits, the fears you've been repeating. The other shows a glimpse of who you could become. The question isn't always which choice is easier or safer, but which choice honors the version of you that you're trying to grow into. When you stand at a decision point, ask yourself, am I choosing to stay the person I've always been, or am I willing to take the step that belongs to the future I want? The body remembers the truth. Sometimes the mind gets tangled in logic, overthinking the right answer, but the body carries a quieter truth. Notice how a decision feels inside you. Some choices tighten your chest, make your stomach heavy, or bring a subtle sense of dread. Others bring a surprising ease, not because they're comfortable, but because they feel honest. This is the somatic check-in. Tension often signals resistance or fear, while openness signals alignment. When you learn to listen to these signals, you realize your body often knows what your mind tries to complicate. Beyond right and wrong, the real question of alignment. We spend so much energy worrying if we're making the right choice, as though life is a test with only one correct answer. But most decisions aren't about right or wrong. They're about alignment or misalignment. Does this choice line up with your values, with the life you're trying to build, with the person you want to wake up as every morning? When you reframe choices in this way, the pressure shifts. You're no longer trying to avoid failure. You're practicing alignment, step by step, choice by choice. The fear of choosing wrong. What holds most people back isn't a lack of clarity, but the fear of regret. The fear of making the wrong choice can freeze you, making inaction feel safer. But in truth, waiting is also a choice, and it often leads to a deeper, quieter regret. The regret of not trying. The regret of staying still while life moved on without you. Fear will whisper that safety is found in avoiding the wrong step. But in reality, freedom comes from realizing that regret grows heavier when you refuse to choose at all. Choosing as an act of becoming. Every decision is less about the outcome, and more about who you become through the act of choosing. Each time you decide with intention, you affirm your identity, your values, and your direction. You don't need absolute certainty. You need willingness. Willingness to align, to grow, to risk discomfort for the sake of truth. Ask yourself, if I choose this, who am I becoming? That is the power of decisions. Not just shaping circumstances, but shaping you. And when you choose with alignment, you're no longer just surviving your life. You're actively creating it.
There comes a point where you realize that too much of your life has been written by other people's hands. Their words, their choices, their expectations have filled the pages of your story. And maybe for a while it felt easier to let them. It felt safer to go along, to avoid conflict, to survive by surrendering the pen. But healing begins the moment you reach out and take it back. Not in anger, not in rebellion, but in quiet recognition that this is your life and your story can't be authored by anyone else. The act of ownership isn't loud. It's a decision made in silence. I will no longer let others write what belongs to me. Yes, what happened to you was real. The betrayal, the loss, the abandonment, it cut deep. And you have every right to name it as pain. But there's a difference between acknowledging pain and living in it as your permanent address. Victimhood tempts you to stay small because it promises safety. If you are the wounded one, you can't be expected to rise, to risk, to change. But here's the truth. The pain is valid, yet victimhood steals the very power that could help you heal. You don't have to deny what happened, but you do have to decide if it will keep deciding for you. It's easy to imagine that someone will show up one day to make it right. The apology you've been waiting for, the recognition you deserve, the love you were owed. So you wait. And while you're waiting, life slips by. Days blur into years, and the weight of what hasn't happened grows heavier than the original wound. Rescue rarely comes the way we picture it. Waiting leaves you frozen in a chapter that could have been closed long ago. The hard truth is this: no one is coming to rewrite your story for you. If you don't pick up the pen, the pages remain higher. Every time you say yes when your body screams no, a piece of you fractures. Boundaries aren't just about keeping others out. They're about keeping yourself whole. Saying no is not rejection, it's repair. It's the quiet stitching together of a self that was torn by overgiving, overpleasing, or overcompromising. Every no becomes a declaration. My story matters. My energy matters. My peace matters. Boundaries don't make you unkind. They make you honest. And honesty with yourself is the first step in writing a life that feels like yours again. Many resist ownership because it sounds like blame, but they are not the same. Blame chains you to guilt. Ownership opens you to freedom. When you say, "This is my life and I'm responsible for it," you aren't excusing what others did. You're reclaiming your power to choose what happens next. Ownership doesn't erase injustice, but it does remove helplessness. It says, yes, they played a part in my pain, but I will play the biggest role in my healing. That is where freedom lives, not in rewriting the past, but in taking authority over the future. Ask yourself honestly, where in your life are you still waiting for someone else to decide for you? Where have you handed over the pen to fear, to guilt, to another person's expectations? Sometimes it's in relationships, where you let others dictate your worth. Sometimes it's in work, where you've silenced your voice for approval. And sometimes it's in your own mind, where old wounds still write the narrative. The question is simple, but it cuts deep. Who holds the pen now? Every time you choose to take it back, you close one loop of waiting and open a new page of becoming. Healing doesn't come in a single sweeping gesture. It comes in the daily, ordinary choices where you reclaim pieces of yourself. A journaling practice where you ask, where am I still waiting? A boundary that protects your peace. A reframe that shifts ownership from blame to power. These aren't small, they're the quiet architecture of a life rebuilt from the inside out. And over time, the pages of your story begin to change. Not because the past is erased, but because you are writing again with steady hands and with a voice that finally sounds like your own. We grow up thinking transformation must be dramatic, a sudden breakthrough, a single moment that rewrites everything. But real change rarely arrives in explosions. It creeps in through the quiet turns, the decisions so small they're easy to overlook. You don't have to burn everything down to rebuild yourself. Sometimes the difference is as subtle as speaking up when you would have stayed silent, or choosing water when you usually reach for something numbing. Small shifts are underestimated because they don't feel like enough in the moment. Yet they're the hidden levers that redirect the entire course of our lives. Think about the morning you finally decide to set the alarm 30 minutes earlier. It doesn't feel like much, just one tired choice. But that choice can create space you never had before. Time to breathe, to write, to think about where your life is heading instead of rushing straight into survival mode. Or the moment you send that uncomfortable email you've been avoiding. It's not life-shattering, but it lifts the quiet weight of avoidance you've been carrying. Every time you say no to what drains you and yes to what restores you, you're not just changing a day, you're rewriting tomorrow before it even arrives. Imagine steering a ship in open waters. At first, a 1-degree turn doesn't look like anything. You're still surrounded by the same horizon. But over miles, that tiny angle takes you to a completely different ocean. That's what small decisions do. They shift the direction without you noticing until one day you look around and realize you're living in a place your old self never thought possible. You didn't get there by waiting for one grand transformation. You got there by moving the wheel degree by degree in the direction of the life you were secretly craving. So why don't we do it? Why do we resist the little actions that could change everything? Because comfort has a way of disguising itself as safety. It whispers, don't bother, it won't matter. It convinces you that small steps aren't worth the effort, better to wait for a perfect moment, a bigger chance, a dramatic push. But deep down, you know that waiting only keeps you in the same loop. The truth is, comfort is the real trap. It shields you from risk, yes, but it also shields you from the possibility of growth. And that's how easy slowly becomes empty. The easiest way to make a small decision stick is to attach it to what you're already doing. If you drink coffee every morning, pair it with writing down one thing you're grateful for. If you scroll at night, swap the first 5 minutes for a stretch or a journal entry. This is called stacking, building new layers on top of routines that already exist.
It doesn't require a new life schedule, just small adjustments that fit where you are. Change isn't about erasing yourself. It's about adding little anchors that keep pulling you toward the person you want to become. Right now, there's probably one small but uncomfortable choice you keep pushing away. Maybe it's the conversation you know you need to have. Maybe it's admitting to yourself that a habit has become a crutch. Maybe it's saying no to someone who's been crossing your lines for too long. These choices scare you not because they're big, but because they're honest. And honesty demands courage. Avoiding them feels easier, but every time you delay, you hand your power away. The shift begins when you stop asking, "What if I fail?" and start asking, "What if this is the step that sets me free?" One decision feels small. Two feels like effort. But repeated enough times, those little choices build a momentum that carries you forward. You don't have to think about it as much, it becomes who you are. The person who speaks up. The person who takes care of their body. The person who follows through instead of running away. Identity isn't born in a single act. It's sculpted in the quiet repetition of decisions you once thought were too small to matter. And one day, without realizing, you'll look back and see the evidence of a different life, built not from leaps but from steady, faithful steps. Part last, you've been moving through life carrying a weight most people never see. Smiling when you're tired, nodding along when inside you feel the pull of doubt, fear, or regret. It's exhausting, isn't it? That quiet heaviness doesn't always scream, it lingers, tucked into the pauses between your words, in the moments when you're alone and the silence feels heavier than the noise. But here's the truth. You don't have to keep carrying it the same way. That heaviness is not a life sentence. It's an invitation. The lie of being broken. For years, maybe you've whispered to yourself, "Something must be wrong with me." That lie has been echoing, shaping how you see yourself, how you trust yourself, how you love yourself. But being hurt does not mean you're broken. Pain is not evidence of failure. It's proof that you've lived, that you've endured, that your story has chapters of survival others can't even see. What if you've never been broken at all? What if you've just been waiting for the moment to step out from the shadow of that lie and into a truer version of yourself? The power hidden in one choice. We often think life changes through massive events, but transformation rarely comes with fireworks. It comes in whispers. One match can light a whole room. One turn of a wheel can take a ship into an entirely different ocean. Your life is no different. A single decision, one moment where you choose differently, can redirect years of repetition. That's how powerful one choice is. And maybe, just maybe, that's the choice waiting for you now. The pause before courage. But here's what's real. Before that choice comes, there's always a pause. A moment of hesitation where your body feels heavy, your chest tightens, and your mind floods with reasons to wait. That pause is not weakness. It's the threshold of courage. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision not to abandon yourself when fear tries to speak the loudest. When you feel that pause, don't run from it. Breathe. Stay with yourself. Because that pause is the birthplace of change. A future self waiting to be met. Close your eyes for a second and imagine yourself 5 years from now. Picture the version of you that is lighter, freer, more whole. That self already exists, waiting for you. The bridge between who you are now and who you want to become isn't 1,000 steps. It's one step taken again and again. One decision that says, "I will not live the same day on repeat. I will not keep waiting for permission to change." That future self is calling. All you have to do is answer with one present choice. The final question that opens the door. So here's where I leave you, not with answers, but with a question. If you had the courage to make one decision today that honored your future self, what would it be? Let the silence hold that question. Don't rush to answer. Sit with it. Write it down. Let it breathe. Because the truth is this, you are not broken. You are not stuck forever. You are one decision away from a different life.